in the ancient kingdom of Macedonia, long before empires rose and fell like tides, there was a night where the sky split with thunder. A restless wind swept through the palace of Pella, carrying the scent of rain and fire. The people whispered that the gods were speaking. Priests read omens in the burning horizon. And in the cradle of that storm, on the 6th day of Hekatombion, in the year 356 BC, a child entered the world. His name was Alexander. To some, he was merely the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. To others, he was a spark of something ancient, something powerful, something that would shake the bones of the earth. Olympias, fierce and mystical, told her son that he was descended from Achilles, that his blood carried the war songs of heroes, that destiny did not wait for the timid. Philip, hardened by decades of war and ambition, looked upon his son and sensed something different. A hunger, a storm that would not be contained. From his earliest days, Alexander lived between two worlds, the disciplined world of soldiers and the mythic world of gods, heroes, and legends. He learned to ride horses before he could properly shape words. He trained with weapons before he ever held a stylus. But even in youth, Alexander was not a child of violence. He was a child of intensity. He lived every second with a sharpened purpose, as if the world were a battlefield waiting to be understood. When he was just a boy, a moment came that revealed the heart of the future conqueror. A tremendous horse, wild and uncontrollable, was brought before Philip. The beast reared and screamed, refusing every handler. The nobles stepped back in fear. The generals whispered that the animal was cursed. Alexander stepped forward. He watched, he studied, and then he spoke. The horse fears its own shadow. A child saw what grown men could not. He turned the horse toward the sun so its shadow fell behind. He approached calmly, whispering to it, placing a hand on its great head, and with a single confident motion, he mounted it. The horse, Bucephalus, obeyed. Philip, watching, murmured to the court, "Macedonia is too small for you. Seek a greater kingdom." Those words were not praise. They were prophecy. As Alexander grew, his mind expanded beyond swords and spears. Philip hired a tutor who would shape the prince's philosophy forever, Aristotle. Under his guidance, Alexander explored astronomy, ethics, medicine, logic, poetry, zoology, and the mysteries of the natural world. He studied Homer's Iliad as if it were scripture. He slept with a copy beneath his pillow. But knowledge didn't soften him. It sharpened him. He believed that a warrior without wisdom was merely a brute, and that a king without vision was merely a ruler of dust. At 16, Philip left Macedonia to campaign in Thrace. In his absence, he left Alexander in command. A neighboring tribe rebelled. Most heirs would wait for their father's return. Alexander raised an army, marched in person, crushed the revolt, and founded a city, naming it Alexandropolis. He was still just a teenager, but destiny is not patient with those it chooses. Philip continued to unite the Greek city-states under the League of Corinth. His eyes turned east toward Persia, the old enemy, the vast empire. He prepared an invasion that would change history. But fate intervened. In a moment of chaos, betrayal, or conspiracy, historians still argue which, Philip II, was assassinated. The throne passed instantly to Alexander. He was 20 years old. Rivals rose, factions plotted, neighboring lands rebelled. Most kings would have been overwhelmed. Alexander acted with the precision of a forged blade. He eliminated threats, secured the loyalty of his army, asserted dominance over Greece, and declared something few would dare to even dream. He would finish Philip's mission. He would conquer Persia. Not for revenge, not for wealth, but because he believed the world could be shaped by will. And his will was unbreakable. Before leaving, he visited the tomb of Achilles. Standing in the shadow of the hero he admired most, he said, "Fortunate Achilles to have had a faithful friend in life and a great poet to sing your deeds." Alexander's friend and poet would be history itself. With Greece united behind him, he crossed the Hellespont in 334 BC. But before his boots touched Persian soil, he hurled a spear into the land and proclaimed, "I claim Asia not by gift, but by conquest." This was no ordinary king. This was a force the world had never witnessed, and the world was about to tremble. Alexander stood at the western edge of Asia, staring across a land ruled for centuries by kings who called themselves masters of the world. He saw not nations, but opportunity. He saw not borders, but a map waiting to be rewritten. Persia was vast, wealthy, ancient, and proud. But Alexander believed one truth with a conviction that burned hotter than any empire. No kingdom is unshakable. His first real test came at the Battle of the Granicus River. Persian satraps lined the opposite bank with cavalry, archers, and Greek mercenaries. It should have been suicide to attack. The river was steep, the current swift, and the enemy ready. Alexander didn't hesitate. He led the first charge himself, leaning forward, spear raised, Bucephalus pounding through the water like a creature of myth. Arrows rained from above. Horses stumbled in the current. Soldiers slipped. But Alexander pressed forward, carving a path through the defenders. His armor shone like a blazing star amid the chaos. One Persian noble hurled his weapon at the young king, nearly killing him. But Alexander's general Clytus intervened at the last second, saving his life. The river ran red, and by the end of the day, the Persians retreated. The message was clear. This Macedonian king was no ordinary invader. He was relentless. He was fearless. He was coming. After Granicus, cities fell, some resisting, some surrendering out of awe. Asia Minor opened like a gate before him, but the true confrontation waited deeper inland. In the autumn of 333 BC, on the plains of Issus, Alexander faced the full might of the Persian king, Darius III. Darius arrived with a colossal army, tens of thousands of soldiers, stretching across the landscape like a living sea of spears and shields. The two leaders stared at each other across the battlefield, one a young lion with a destiny burning behind his eyes, the other the ruler of an empire spanning from Egypt to India. When the battle began, the earth shook beneath the charge of the Macedonian phalanx. Shields locked, spears leveled, lines crashed. Alexander, as always, rode at the front, guiding his forces like a conductor, commanding a violent symphony. He spotted a gap in the Persian formation, just a flicker, a moment. He seized it. With a swing of his arm, he plunged into the breach, driving his cavalry straight at the royal chariot. Dust erupted around him. Horses screamed. Steel rang against steel. And then Darius fled. The great king of Persia turned his chariot and disappeared from the battlefield. His army collapsed as panic spread. But what Alexander found left him speechless. The family of Darius, his mother, his wife, his daughters, left behind in the Persian camp. Many expected Alexander to enslave them, to use them as trophies of war. Instead, he spoke gently to the Queen Mother, assuring her, "You have nothing to fear from Alexander." He protected them, treated them with dignity, and in doing so, he won not just battles, but the respect of nations. From Issus, Alexander marched south toward the fortified island city of Tyre. Tyre resisted him fiercely. Its walls were legendary, its navy powerful, its location nearly impregnable. Most kings would have besieged it for years, if they dared at all. Alexander built a causeway across the sea. Stone by stone, he turned the water into land, dragging siege machines closer and closer. Tyrian divers sabotaged his structures, fire ships destroyed his towers. The sea itself seemed to resist him. But Alexander rebuilt, adapted, pushed. 7 months passed, and then the walls fell. Tyre was taken. Its defiance became a warning to the world. Nothing could stop him. Not walls, not oceans, not gods. After Tyre, Alexander marched into Egypt. The people welcomed him as a liberator, tired of Persian rule. The priests of Amun proclaimed him the son of a god. Alexander traveled through the desert to the Siwa oasis, where the oracle greeted him privately. No historian knows exactly what was said, but when Alexander emerged, he carried himself with a new aura, quiet, confident, unshakable, as if he now believed, fully and truly, that he was destined for greatness beyond human measure. In Egypt, he founded the city that would immortalize his name, Alexandria, the future heart of science, culture, and power. But the war with Persia was not finished. The final confrontation loomed over the horizon. In 331 BC, on the vast plains of Gaugamela, Alexander again faced Darius III. This battle was not like Issus. This time Darius came prepared, with scythed chariots, elite cavalry, and soldiers gathered from every corner of his empire. The battlefield itself was leveled and cleared by Persian workers to maximize chariot speed. Alexander studied the terrain, the formations, the patterns of dust in the wind. His mind worked like a grand strategist, a living blueprint of war. As dawn rose, the sky glowed red, as if even the sun felt the weight of the moment. The armies collided. Persian chariots thundered forward, blades mounted on their wheels, tearing through soil. Macedonian archers unleashed volleys that shattered their momentum. The phalanx held firm. Shields slammed together, creating an iron wall. Then Alexander saw his chance. He swung to the right, stretching the Persian line. Darius responded, shifting his own troops to compensate. In doing so, the great king created a gap. Alexander struck like lightning. He led the companion cavalry directly at the Persian center, a move so daring, so precise, that it is still studied in military academies today. He rode straight toward Darius. The chariot turned once again. The great king fled the field a second time. Persian morale collapsed. The empire trembled. Alexander pursued relentlessly. Babylon surrendered. Susa opened its gates. Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia, fell into his hands. In Persepolis, wealth beyond imagination lay before him. Gold, art, jewels, and scrolls from civilizations older than Macedonia itself. And then, flames rose. Whether by accident, impulse, or symbolic vengeance, the palace of Persepolis burned. Fire devoured its walls, its columns, its stories. Smoke curled toward the heavens, blotting out the stars. Alexander watched the inferno without expression. For him, the fall of Persia was not the end. It was merely another beginning. He marched east in pursuit of Darius, who fled deeper into his own empire seeking allies. But Darius had been betrayed. Alexander found the Persian king abandoned and dying, stabbed by his own satraps. He covered the fallen monarch with his cloak, ordered a royal funeral, and vowed to hunt down the traitors. With Darius dead, Alexander inherited not just land, but a legacy. He declared himself King of Asia. Yet even an empire stretching from Greece to the deserts of Persia could not satisfy the fire inside him. His eyes turned farther east, toward lands unknown, whispered about in stories brought by traders, lands of rivers, jungles, and new kings. Alexander's ambition expanded beyond empire. He wanted to reach the edge of the world, to see what lay beyond the horizon, to carve his name into the bones of the earth. And his army followed, not because they feared him, but because they believed in him. This was no longer a campaign. It was a march into legend. After the fall of Persia, a lesser man would have declared victory. He would have returned home with parades, songs, and the spoils of a fallen empire. But Alexander was different. He looked at the map not as a collection of borders, but as an unfinished story. And his story was far from complete. He had crossed Asia Minor, shattered armies at Issus, broken the pride of Tyre, taken Egypt without a battle, and brought the mighty Persian Empire to its knees at Gaugamela. But in his heart burned a deeper hunger, a restless desire that seemed to echo from the age of heroes, an unyielding urge to push farther, to see what lay beyond every frontier. He was no longer chasing Darius. He was chasing the edge of the world. With the Persian Empire now under his rule, Alexander reorganized the territories, appointed new governors, and attempted to blend Macedonian and Persian cultures. He adopted Persian dress, welcomed Persian nobles, and married Roxana, a noblewoman from Bactria, an act that symbolized not domination, but unification. Yet even as he built bridges between cultures, his feet were pointed east, toward Bactria, toward Sogdia, toward India. The journey ahead was not glory. It was hardship carved into stone. The march through Central Asia tested even Alexander's legendary endurance. The terrain was brutal. Mountains rose like jagged walls against the sky. Valleys were filled with hidden enemies. The tribes of Bactria fought with a ferocity Alexander had rarely seen. They ambushed at night, vanished into cliffs by day, and refused to meet him on open ground. Alexander adapted. He scaled cliffs in darkness. He crossed rivers swollen with ice. He built fortresses in the mountains. He fought not just armies, but the land itself. In the fortress city of Sogdia, high on a sheer rock, rebels taunted him, saying he would need men with wings to capture it. Alexander replied coldly, "Then we shall grow wings." He gathered the most agile soldiers, volunteers who tied strips of linen to their armor to reduce noise, climbed the cliffs at night using tent pegs, and seized the fortress at dawn. The rebels surrendered in disbelief. This was Alexander's genius, not brute force, but imagination. He saw victory where others saw the impossible. During this campaign, he met Roxana, whose intelligence and courage impressed him deeply. Their marriage symbolized something rare, an attempt to blend East and West, not by conquest alone, but by connection. But as Alexander pushed further east, rumors whispered of a land beyond the mountains, a land of massive rivers, thick forests, monsoons, and kings who rode elephants into battle, a land the Persians had feared, a land called India. Alexander's eyes lit with a familiar spark, the look of a man who sensed destiny calling him once more. He crossed the Hindu Kush, a range so treacherous that even today climbers speak of it with awe. Snowstorms lashed his men, supplies dwindled, avalanches swallowed entire groups. The cold cut through armor and bone. Yet they marched. At last, after months of relentless hardship, they reached the Indus River, the gateway to India. The land was unlike anything they had known. The air was heavy with moisture, the forests alive with sound, and the rivers wide like oceans. Alexander founded cities, negotiated with local rulers, fought isolated battles, and forged alliances. But his greatest challenge awaited on the banks of the Hydaspes River, where King Porus commanded an army unlike any Alexander had ever faced. Porus was a giant of a man, tall and imposing, noble in bearing. He brought with him cavalry, infantry, chariots, and, most frightening of all, war elephants, towering beasts armored in iron, carrying towers on their backs. It was a new kind of war. Thunder boomed as monsoon rain hammered the river. Alexander studied Porus carefully. He saw not a barbarian king, but a worthy opponent, one of the few he would respect deeply. Knowing the river was nearly impossible to cross under Porus's watch, Alexander created confusion. He moved his camp repeatedly, launching false crossings, deceptive marches, and night maneuvers until Porus could no longer guess his intentions. And on a stormy night, Alexander crossed upriver, using the thunder to mask the sound of oars. At dawn, the battle began. War elephants charged, their tusks sharpened, their bells ringing like war drums. Many Macedonian horses panicked at the sight and smell of the beasts. Alexander's cavalry maneuvered, darting in and out, striking the flanks. The phalanx advanced against a wall of living giants, its spears rattling against thick hides. The elephants trampled men, tossing them like leaves, yet the Macedonians held their lines. Arrows darkened the sky. The ground became mud, a mixture of rain, blood, and broken spears. Alexander, as always, rode at the front, directing the battle with precision. Porus fought with the strength of 10 men, refusing to retreat. His courage was unmistakable. After hours of brutal combat, the Macedonians prevailed. But Porus did not fall. Captured, wounded, but unbroken, he was brought before Alexander. Alexander looked at him with admiration and asked, "How do you wish to be treated?" Porus replied, "As a king." Alexander smiled. "So it shall be." He returned Porus's lands and granted him more territory than he had before. It was not generosity. It was recognition. Even greatness bows to greatness. After Hydaspes, Alexander planned to march deeper into India, toward the Ganges, toward new kingdoms whispered in legends. But his army, exhausted from years of continuous war, refused. They begged him, "We have followed you to the ends of the earth. There are no more worlds to conquer." For the first time, Alexander's will met something stronger. Not rebellion, but the limits of human endurance. He withdrew to his tent and wept, not from weakness, but from frustration. He had wanted to see the ocean at the edge of the world. Realizing that even he could not fight destiny alone, Alexander agreed to return west. But the path home would become one of the harshest trials in his entire life. Part of his army sailed with Nearchus down the Indus toward the ocean. Alexander chose to lead the rest through the Gedrosian desert, a wasteland of endless dunes, scorching winds, and deadly heat. It was a decision that echoed the ancient stories he loved. Heroes do not return by the easy path. The desert did not welcome them. Temperatures soared. Water ran scarce. Soldiers collapsed under the sun. Supplies burned or were lost to shifting winds. Thousands died. But Alexander refused comfort. When his men offered him water gathered in a helmet, he poured it into the sand so they could see that he would not drink while they thirsted. That single act lifted spirits more than any victory. After months of hell, they emerged from Gedrosia, broken but alive. Alexander had lost far more men to the desert than to any battle. He finally returned to Persia, not as a young conqueror, but as a hardened titan. A man who had seen the whole world stretched before him and realized how small even the greatest empires truly are. Yet even now, he was not finished. His mind burned with new visions, cities, trade routes, cultural fusion, a world united under shared law and language. Alexander had marched through continents. He had defied nature, toppled dynasties, crushed armies, and embraced kings. He had reached farther than any hero of myth. But one last chapter remained, and it would not be written on the battlefield. When Alexander emerged from the brutal Gedrosian desert, he was no longer the same man who had crossed into Asia nearly a decade earlier. His hair was longer, his face harder, his gaze deeper. He had walked through storms, deserts, mountains, jungles, and he had outlived them all. But beneath the surface, something had changed. He had touched the edges of the known world. He had seen lands beyond maps. He had stood against kings, gods, and nature itself. And now, as he entered Babylon in 324 BC, the crowds greeted him not merely as a conqueror, but as a figure of myth. People traveled from distant lands just to glimpse him. Poets compared him to Heracles, Achilles, and Dionysus. Some whispered that he was more than mortal. But the closer he came to the center of his empire, the more Alexander realized that conquering was simple compared to ruling. An empire won by the sword cannot survive by the sword alone. He began shaping his greatest vision, a world united, not by force, but by culture, language, marriage, and shared destiny. Alexander reorganized his territories, blending Macedonians and Persians into one administration. He encouraged his officers to marry Persian nobles, creating bonds of blood as well as politics. He trained Persians in Macedonian military tactics and welcomed them into elite units. He envisioned a kingdom where Greek and Persian, Macedonian and Egyptian, Indian and Bactrian could stand side by side. It was revolutionary. It was ambitious. It was dangerous. Many Macedonian generals grew uneasy. They had followed Alexander through every hardship, but feared this cultural fusion. They whispered that their king had become too Persian. They feared losing their privilege, their identity, their power. Alexander sensed the tension. He sensed the rising storm. And then came a tragedy that shook him to the core. His closest friend, his alter ego, the man who had marched with him through every battlefield since boyhood, Hephaestion, fell ill and died. Alexander broke. The conqueror who had crossed continents without bending a knee fell to the ground in grief. He refused food, tore his clothes, cut his hair, and shut himself away from the world. He ordered massive ceremonies in Hephaestion's honor. He demanded that the empire mourn with him. Some say he treated Hephaestion not as a general, but as the other half of his soul. His officers watched with worry. His enemies saw an opportunity. His body and spirit grew heavy. Yet even in grief, Alexander's mind did not slow. He turned to the future with a renewed, almost desperate intensity, as if he sensed time slipping away, like sand through open fingers. He announced preparations for a new campaign, one that would make Persia look like a footnote. He would build a fleet. He would explore Arabia. He would march around the Arabian Peninsula, conquer its tribes, and then push west into Africa. He wanted to encircle the world, to map the oceans, to connect continents through roads and trade, to create a unified order of nations. No king had dreamed so audaciously. No empire had ever attempted such unity. He drafted tens of thousands of new soldiers. He ordered shipyards to begin construction. He sent explorers into the marshes of Babylon. He planned new cities that would stretch like stars across the desert. It was a vision far beyond conquest. It was the blueprint of a global world. But fate does not negotiate, even with kings. In early June of 323 BC, during a banquet with his officers, Alexander began to feel a strange heaviness in his limbs. A fever crept through his body like a silent enemy. His voice weakened. His breath grew shallow. The greatest general in history, the man who had survived arrows, blades, storms, deserts and rebellions, was brought low by an invisible foe. Some accounts say he collapsed after drinking cold wine. Others speak of exhaustion, infection, or illness from the marshlands. Whispers arose of poisoning, treachery, betrayal. But truth dissolves in time, and history guards its secrets well. Alexander lay in his palace in Babylon, unable to rise. Generals crowded around him, pleading for orders, asking whom he would name as successor. They needed guidance. The empire was vast, fragile, and dependent on his will. For days, he slipped in and out of consciousness. He could no longer speak clearly. He could barely lift his head. His soldiers, hardened veterans who had followed him from Macedon to India, insisted on seeing him. Thousands filed past his bed in silence. Some touched his hand, some cried openly, others saluted through tears, knowing they were witnessing the end of something the world would never see again. When asked whom he wished to inherit his empire, Alexander whispered a phrase that has echoed across centuries: "To the strongest." Whether he meant it literally or symbolically, no one knows. But the words lit a fire in the hearts of his generals, a fire that would eventually tear apart everything he had built. On June 10th, 323 BC, Alexander the Great exhaled his final breath. He was 32 years old. The earth did not shake. The sky didn't thunder. The gods did not speak. But the world felt the loss of a force that had moved it like a tide. His empire had no true heir. His generals, known as the Diadochi, would carve it into pieces and plunge into decades of war. The unity he had dreamed of unraveled within years. Yet what remained was something deeper, something that could not be divided by swords or borders. Alexander left behind not just cities, but ideas. He spread Greek culture across continents, igniting the Hellenistic Age, an era of science, art, mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and architecture that would shape civilizations for centuries. He founded more than 20 cities, many of which flourished long after empires fell. He connected worlds that had never touched before. He showed that ambition, when fused with intelligence, courage, and vision, could turn a single human life into a force that reshapes history. His legacy became larger than the empire he built. It became a symbol of possibility. When people speak of Alexander, they do not speak of borders or titles. They speak of the boy who tamed a wild horse, the prince who slept with Homer under his pillow, the general who led from the front, the king who believed that culture could unite people, the man who stood at the edge of the world and asked what lay beyond. He was not perfect. He made mistakes, burned cities, fought relentlessly, pushed his men too far. He was human, brilliant, flawed, driven, fierce, restless. But that is exactly why he remains unforgettable. Alexander's story is not the tale of a conqueror alone. It is the tale of a mind that refused limits, a heart that refused fear, a will that refused the ordinary. He did not live long, but he lived wide, so wide that the echo of his footsteps still stirs the dust of history. And as long as maps exist, as long as ambition drives the human spirit, as long as people look beyond the horizon and wonder, Alexander the Great will never disappear. He did not conquer the world. He expanded it.